CBN Christian Broadcast Network posted a report that 70 Christians were beheaded in the Congo. Of course, this is tied to a radical Islamic group, which is a vast majority of those who follow Islam, because that's what the Quran teaches. So we'll look a little bit into this and see what's going on with this tragedy exactly, some Bible verses, and I'll reference some Quran verses as well.
70 Christians have been found beheaded. Yes, beheaded in a church in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Why is no one reporting this? Why does no one seem to care? Well, let me bring in Dexter Van Zyl, an expert on anti-Christian violence. Dexter, what can you tell us about this absolutely barbaric atrocity?
Okay, well, first of all, it took place in the Democratic Republic of Congo, which is a huge country with about 105 million people that right now is basically in a conflict with neighboring Rwanda over territory in Kivu, okay? And the violence was perpetrated by an organization that was affiliated with ISIS. And the thing is that there are some people who have argued that they are essentially working on behalf of Rwanda, because Rwanda is a neighboring country that covets and is actually taking control of an awful lot of the mineral resources in Kivu. And so what this violence has done is demonstrated that the Congo cannot protect its citizens from violence in Kivu or in North Kivu. And so what people are worried about is that this is essentially an attempt to kind of destabilize the Democratic Republic of Congo and legitimize Rwandan claims to the minerals in the region. And I don't want to underestimate or downplay the ideological hatred by the perpetrators of this group who murdered these Christians. But the thing is that it's taking place against a backdrop of geopolitics in Africa. Mm-hmm. And what has happened is, and so if the Congo, under the leadership of Felix Tshisekedi, can't protect its borders, essentially it's going to have to go for help outside the country. And the people live there, and that's why people are worried about it. The Congolese that I've spoken to here in the States say, I said, wait a minute, are you telling me that the Rwandans are supporting this attack? And they said, yes. And I said, but Rwanda is a Christian nation. And they said, yes, but this will help destabilize the region where all of these minerals that are used for the iPhones that we make, that we use in our lives. And so clearly there's an ideological and a theological component going on, but there's also a strategic issue as well.
Well, even if there is a geopolitical backdrop behind this, or if the reason that this attack is rooted in just trying to gain access to certain minerals, think about just the process of how this just even went through, even with that being the case. They still went to an Islamic group to find the people to go and behead 70 Christians living in this town. I mean, you can't find any reports anywhere of people going to a Christian organization and them going out and doing that type of bidding. So it just really comes back to the root of what's the root of Islam? The root very clearly is evil, war, demonic. I'll play a video here in just a minute showing that that's absolutely the case. And I just want to bring this verse up because it is relevant. Revelation 24. Now, this isn't what's going on, but this is just something to keep in mind, because what's most important, no matter what season any Christian is going through, is that you stay faithful to the end, to Jesus Christ. Revelation 24, and I saw thrones, and they sat on them, and judgment was committed to them. Then I saw the souls of those who had been beheaded for their witness to Jesus and for the word of God, who had not worshipped the beast or his image, and had not received his mark on their foreheads or on their hands. And they lived and reigned with Christ for 1,000 years. So the people who don't even put their life ahead of following Jesus, and the people in this case who even suffer being beheaded for the case of Christ, will live and reign with Jesus for 1,000 years, which will be better than anything that anyone could ever have given to them on this earth. So it's important to keep that in mind.
Oh,
it's terrible, isn't it? As a former Peace Corps volunteer, I served in the Congo for about a year, 14 months in the 1980s. And the problem is that if this violence is allowed to continue, and the average Congolese learns and recognizes, and the violence like this against Christians perpetrated by jihadists is not a new problem. It's been a problem in North Africa for a long time.
Christian persecution is something that's really increasing in the earth. It's actually considered to be at like genocide levels when you look at around the world, how many Christians are going through this. And a lot of the Middle East, of course, and the Islamic nations, they really persecute Christianity because it has the truth. And, Islam really only flourishes where it can be where it can spread through absolute force. That's really the only way. When you come to nations where people have the free will, they don't choose that because it's barbaric, and you can see right through the lies and the plagiarism, which is why we see the UK and these different nations in Europe being completely changed to Islamic nations. What's going on? It's being done by force with the immigrants who have come into the nation and are just forcing their Islamic beliefs on the population and trying to force Sharia law to be a law within these European nations. It's insane to see.
And the problem is that trying to get people to pay attention to it is very difficult.
Well, that's my second question. Is you see the headline, 70 Christians beheaded, and you think, this is what you almost can't fathom that headline. But is Islamic violence against Christians in Africa, is this an anomaly, basically?
Oh, no, absolutely not. This takes place in a number of countries throughout the region. And there are some people who are worried that essentially what we're looking at is a jihad against Christians in numerous other places in North Africa. And routinely, we hear reports of these acts of violence. And the problem is that what happens when the Christians start to fight back? Are we going to start to see the equivalent of an interreligious war in the continent? And the problem is that there's going to be huge problems with this. The problem is that, first of all, the reason why this doesn't get as much traction as, say, the conflict, the Palestinian suffering in Gaza, is because there's just not that many reporters on the ground. And the Congo is a huge, dangerous place to be a reporter. And frankly, also, there's just a fair amount of ideological indifference to anti-Christian violence on the part of reporters in the West.
And Dexter, I think that's
absolutely the case. How many times do you hear a story of different, especially, we're seeing it a lot in Europe coming out with these, how many news reports are trying to favor the Islamic immigrants who've come into the nation, and they're committing terrible acts and they're acting like they're not, when the vast majority of them are. The same thing we see in America with them trying to discount how many criminals have come through the Mexican border. And it's just very obvious that that's the case. Of course, it's not everybody, but to discount that that's going on is just absolutely insane. And so, of course, in the West, you have the mainstream media, who everyone now, most people who are like under the age of 40 understand that the mainstream media is completely controlled and worthless on like pretty much every level. It's hard, but they're staying run with their lies with the people pretty much over the age of 40, but it's very obvious that they have an anti-Christian point of view in like practically every way that they talk about every story that they put out.
The question, if you were to replace 70 Congolese Christian with any other minority group, 70 Palestinians were beheaded, 70 people at a pride parade were beheaded. This would be the biggest news story of the decade. And yet this just happened and no one's reporting on it. And literally crickets.
Shows the Bible's real.
It's like that with Boko Haram when they murder people in Nigeria. There's basically crickets. And I think a lot of it has to do with the
it really just shows that the Bible is true when you see how there's no media reporting on this, and yet what does the Bible say? Christians will be beheaded for their faith in Jesus Christ. Again, this is not what's happening in the Congo. This is not in relation to what Revelation 20 tells us, but just the fact that that's going on and the media doesn't even reference it. It just shows that there's something bigger going on here. Because just like you mentioned, if any of those other groups would have said 70 beheaded, it'd be everywhere, all over the news.
The fact that we have essentially kind of an anti-Christian bias on the part of people who run the media. And the thing is that I think there's another factor is that essentially Christianity has been lumped in with essentially this whole notion of settler colonialism, and that whatever violence is directed their way is largely a consequence of the violence perpetrated by Christians in years past.
But
I'm going to tell you, I lived in Zaire, I lived in the DRC when it was called Zaire. And one of the reasons why I became a much more devout Christian was because of the church that I went to every Sunday morning as a volunteer. Okay. And I would go and talk to the local pastor when I had like spiritual crises as a volunteer. And the thing is that, so what has happened is that Black African Christians, okay, have suffered the consequences of hostility towards Western civilization and Christianity itself, in part because people don't care what happens to Christians unless it can be blamed. And part of it has to do with the fact that if the perpetrators are dark-skinned, well, then we're going to have to give them a pass. And it's a very, very strange milieu, so to speak, that we work in. But the thing is that unfortunately, this is the cynical side of me. I've been somebody that has documented hostility towards Israel for the past 20 years. But if the IDF were responsible for these beheadings, it would have made the front page of the Washington Post and the New York Times and every newspaper throughout the world. And there would be, Israeli Jews condemning it as well. But the problem is that because it's essentially black on black violence, nobody cares.
It's really terrible to hear what is going on. I pray for the 70 Christians who are beheaded, for their families to find peace, for the Christians in that region to find complete help within the Lord and safety and supernatural protection. That's something we should be praying for every day, the supernatural protection of God, the declarations of his word, of his mighty hand watching over us. And let's be praying for the persecuted church around the world, because there's a lot of them right now, sadly. And one of the main reasons and perpetrators against the Christian church is one that absolutely needs to be called out on every single front. I mean, we don't know when Bible prophecy is going to fully unfold and when the last days will actually be. There's a lot of signs that look like it could be any day now. It could start, but we don't actually know. It could be a long time. And if we want any sort of peace and stability for the future of our world, Islam either has to be completely reformed, which would still be worthless because it's a false religion, it's plagiarized, it's very obvious. At the very least, if they want to keep their false god and follow Allah, they have to be reformed and take the violence out of it, or it just has to be really be abolished, which is what should be really going on, because it's very obviously a plagiarized false god religion. Some people say, oh, it's just moderate. There's just very small minority of radical Islam people. That's not what the Quran teaches. Those are actually true followers of the Quran. All the other ones who don't are lukewarm Muslims, because they actually have the laws of God written on their heart, of the true God, the God of the Bible, and they don't want to commit atrocities. But the ones who actually believe the Quran for what it says, these are some of the verses. Quran 2:191, slay the unbelievers wherever you find them. How about Muslims must not take the infidels as friends? That would be anybody who's not a Muslim. Any religion other than Islam is not acceptable. Miam and crucify the infidels if they criticize Islam. Terrorize and behead those who believe in scriptures other than the Quran. Muslims must muster all weapons to terrorize the infidels. It really goes on and on. Unbelievers are stupid. Muslims are urged to fight them. When the opportunity arises, kill the infidels wherever you find them. I mean, it continuously goes on and on. They really go after the Jews and Christians because they're the ones who actually have, they're following the original, absolutely true God. And so Islam is constantly against them. I mean, Muhammad waged literally, it wasn't 100, but I think it was like 80 wars or 50 wars and killed hundreds of people. And not only that, he married a 9-year-old when he was 53. I mean, is that the type of person you want to be following and you think is actually a good spiritual leader? It needs to be abolished. And if they're going to hang on to their false god, it has to be reformed if we're going to have any sort of peace in this world. This is also a pretty cool and pretty important reference I wanted to show as well. Those are the cross references in the Quran. Many people are probably aware of this chart here. That's the cross references of the Bible. I mean, it looks like a rainbow. Hey, look at the Quran. I mean, that's pretty bad. That's like less cross references than your average like children's story. And then there's the Bible. I mean, over the course of thousands of years, with the same exact stories written within God's references, Muhammad took and wrote in his own book. It couldn't be more obvious. It's plagiarized off of the Bible, and they're building up all of their false god. And that's why whenever a group of people, even if it's done for the resources, needs 70 people in a village, 70 Christians beheaded, they're not going to their local Christians. They're not going to the local Jews. They're not even going to the local Hindus, even though they're very violent against Christians as well. They go to the Muslims. Why? Because what did we see here? Quran 2:191, slay the unbelievers wherever you find them. It even says to behead. To behead them. That's why they go to those who follow Islam. I just want to remind everybody, it's something that we all really should keep in mind. First off, God is ever faithful. He will always be with us. We can trust him in every single circumstance. But there are quite a lot of prophecies about What's coming in the future? Matthew 10, Matthew 24, Luke 21, and the parallel passage of Matthew 24, the Olivet Discourse, where Jesus talks about there's going to be tribulation. They'll kill you. You'll be hated by all nations for my name's sake. They're even going to take people into courts and synagogues and scourge you. This could have been more of a reference to his disciples, but we know, according to Revelation, that this is coming in the end as well. We know mass persecution will come. Anyone who doesn't receive the mark will be killed or not even able to buy or sell or trade. Most likely trade. Maybe between each other, that's about it. And Jesus even said, a slave is not greater than his master. If they persecuted me, they're going to persecute you too. But if they kept my word, they will also keep yours. Jesus also says, though, anybody who actually suffers persecution for my sake, great is their reward. You couldn't even imagine. The Christians who were just beheaded, who were following Jesus, who were saved, and were just beheaded for the cause of Christ, will have more than even the world. If somebody even had the ability to give you the whole world, it would not compare to what they have in heaven. So suffering through persecution, no matter how bad it is, it will not compare to the reward that actually lasts forever. Thank God we're in heaven forever and here for a short time, and those roles aren't flipped. What we actually get for eternity, if you believe in Jesus Christ, is amazing, and any persecution you go through for the name of Jesus Christ will bring you a reward in heaven that you couldn't even comprehend, better than anything you would get out of denying Christ in this world. That's for absolutely certain. Sad to see. So let's be in prayer for the persecuted church around the world in these times that we go into, and let's do our best to point out the atrocities that go on with organizations such as Islam. So if the end times are for quite a while off, we can try to have as much peace in the world as possible, which truly comes through Jesus Christ. And so I hope and pray that everyone out there will do their best to spread the message of Christ, the gospel. And I hope and pray you guys are well. Thanks for watching. God bless.